Mr. Joseph Babatunde is the General Manager Operations of the Bank of Industry, and he oversees some of these large enterprises. He's going to tell us more about some of the activities that the bank is carrying out in this line, the support, the focus, and the impact that is aimed at supporting large enterprises.
Well, it is true that based on the paradigm shift, focus has been much more on the micro, small, and medium enterprises because, like you are aware, this is what is generally classified as the engine of growth in every economy. This is the sector where you have a preponderance of players within the economy. Yes, that is true. But at the same time, also, we are still doing a reasonable number of large, credits. And the way it is done, if you recall, there have been some other interventions talking about the cotton, textile, and garment funding, which is about 100 billion. We have used that to a large extent to revamp a lot of big textile companies. A lot of them also involve engineers. So a lot of them belong to the large enterprises group. So we have done that. We are also involved in financing a lot of corporate, fairly big companies that have linkage or a kind of a synergy with the small and medium enterprises. So essentially what they do is that they utilize most of what those small and medium enterprises are producing as their input. So what we try to encourage now is to ensure that there's a synergy between the large projects and the relatively small and medium enterprises.
We know when it comes to the SMEs, some of the considerations are that they should promote or they should use more raw materials from Nigeria and all that in order to promote our own thing here. What about in the case of large enterprises? What are some of those things you look out for, before you support some of these companies?
For the large enterprises, like Riley said, yes, in terms of the capitalization, is much. We'll talk about maybe loans from about maybe 300 million, 500 million and above. Okay, we'll look at them as being fairly large. And apart from that, we also emphasize the fact that there must be reasonable local content. Okay, at least a good number of them also must be able to source their raw materials, locally. And then apart from that, in terms of the basic requirements, in terms of documentation, they are basically the same for both SMEs and the large enterprises. In terms of the basic documentation requirement. But what differentiates the two basically, is the total capitalization and then the number of employment, that they are capable of, generating.
What sectors of the industry, when we're talking about large enterprises, what sectors actually gets the attention on the Bank of Industry? Do you really support? Do you have a passion for?
Well, in the large enterprises group within Bank of Industry, we focus a lot on agribusiness. Okay, we have agribusiness, and under that same agribusiness now, we also look at the cotton, textile, and garment value chain. Apart from the ordinary agribusinesses generally, involving a lot of processing of various agricultural products. So we are doing that a lot. And secondly, apart from that, we are also heavily involved in what they call the chemical and pharmaceutical sector. If you look at any of the major pharmaceutical companies today in Nigeria, a lot of them will have investments, in them, because there is this need to comply, with the new WHO requirements in terms of the standard and quality of their products. So we have supported a reasonable number of them to attain, that standard. Apart from that, we also have a lot of exposure in terms of solid mineral processing. Okay, and apart from that, we also get involved in ICT, which are fairly big tickets. And under that also, we are what they call the NAC scheme. That's the National Automobile Council. We are supporting a lot of initiatives that can be producing local components of both motorcycles and motor vehicles. you know. I mean, like we are aware, we've supported even vehicle assembly plants, and which they are doing now. One of the major ones of them is Innocence, you know, which is heavily involved in assembling local vehicles, you know. So those are the major sector. Of course, lest I forget, and very important too, is in the area of entertainment. That's the creative industry. There also we are playing. We've sponsored a reasonable number of films, you know, like we are aware. We have also been involved in building cinema outlets to contribute our quota to the distribution, which has been a major problem for most players in the film industry. So basically within the large enterprises group, we have the following sectors, sectoral structure. We have the agribusiness, okay, we have the cotton, textile and garment division, and of course we have the chemical and pharmaceutical division. We have what they call the solid minerals engineering and technology division, and we are also playing infrastructure. So we are now supporting power projects, particularly captive power projects. You know, we are supporting some of them, and in fact recently we financed 2 projects for the local production of electricity meters, you know, so that we can be part of solving the distribution problem within the electricity sector. And like I said, we have what they call the gender, entertainment and the special products division within the large enterprises group.
You mentioned the power projects that the Bank of Industry is now working in that line, and we know once you mention power, every business person in Nigeria, you know, they just, that you catch their attention. So how exactly is BOI working to help in providing power in Nigeria?
Well, you will recall that within this same head office operations, we have what we call the Central Bank Intervention Desk, if you recall. And we are currently actively involved in managing the Central Bank Intervention Fund, both for the refinancing and restructuring of loans to manufacturing sector. And then we also have that 300 billion for the power and airline fund. Under that particular fund, we are working with so many of the commercial banks, you know, by either refinancing existing loan they give to power projects or setting up of new power projects. In the process, we observe that for us as Bank of Industry, we play in the manufacturing sector where power is so critical. In fact, power accounts for about 30 to 40% of the overhead. And looking at that, we believe that as Bank of Industry, we need to also support, you know, investment in the power sector. So what we've been doing in the last couple of years, we now set up what they call the energy and infrastructure desk, you know, within the bank, so that we can also support private sector initiative in terms of adding some megawatts, you know, to the power line. And what we've been doing recently is talking about these captive power projects, you know. Our belief is that if we can provide power for a cluster of industry within a particular location, they will not have to depend on the national grid. So that will free more power for some other users that cannot afford or access that. So essentially, that's what it's all about. And we are doing this in such that it can also support some of our projects that we have financed, so that they can have relative access to electricity at reasonable cost.
Yes, mostly the Bank of Industry's facility goes into equipment, acquiring equipment for these companies. That's for the SME. Is it the same thing for the large enterprise?
In terms of modus operandi, you know, either a large project or a small and medium project, they're basically the same process. You know, most of our loan goes into financing items of plant and machinery, you know, essentially for most of these manufacturing companies. Even the big ones, most of them, we are either replacing obsolete equipment, okay, or we are acquiring new items of plant and machinery where it involves expansion. You know, maybe a company already have one line. Because of very high demand, they want to, you know, bring in an additional line. Of course, we finance. Or they have been in operation for about 15, 20 years. Equipments are getting old, they want to replace them. We give them loan to replace such equipment. And of course, in some cases too, for those projects that we finance, when they have need for working capital, we give what they call structured working capital to enable them to take off and operate so that they can stand and be in a position to access further credit from, commercial bank or any other sources.
When you talk to a lot of Nigerians and you mention the fact that they can get loans from banks, you know, first of all, generally when you mention loans, they tell you, okay, yeah, the interest rate is one thing. For the Bank of Industry is maximum of 10%. But they do complain of hidden charges. So if you could please just explain some of these other things, you know, that are involved, so that people know these charges are not really hidden and there's a reason for them.
Basically, our interest rate is 10%. And it is like that because these are relatively subsidized funds. Okay? Particularly for what we call the BOI line of credit. Okay? There are some other funds we manage that are even less than that 10%. If we talk about the cotton and textile garment fund, as of today, is 6%. The rice fund is 4%. So what happened, the way the things work is that it depends on the governing memorandum of understanding and the source of the credit that we are talking about. For the fund directly sourced from Bank of Industry, that's what we call the BOI line of credit. Basically, is 10% interest. But there are some other funds, depending on the agreement reached with the fund provider, we are negotiate and agree on what the interest should be, and that one governs, the loan. Now, coming to the issue of hidden charges, basically we have what they call appraisal fee, which is what they call processing fee or due diligence fee. It's called different names in different institutions, but basically it's the same thing. You will agree with me that every institution will need to cover its costs. In order to carry a due diligence on appraisal of a project, you have to travel extensively to do various surveys. You have to carry out different research. In fact, in some particular cases, you may even have to engage a consultant to work, depending on how complex the project is. So essentially, that 1% of the loan, which is one-off, I must make that very clear, it's one-off. Because if you want to get it right, you have to annualize that 1% over the tenure of the loan. Of course, the second charge is 1% commitment fee, which is understandable. Why? Because if I agree to give you 5 million naira, for instance, the moment I give you the offer is committed. If you come tomorrow, I need the 5 million, I have to make it available. The opportunity cost of that is for me to have been able to put the money in a fixed deposit, for example, and earn reasonable interest. But because I will have to forgo that the moment you call for the fund, so it brings about the commitment. So basically, these are the two charges, and they are not hidden. Like I said, they are so open, but they are once and for all. You see, and when you want to calculate it, if a loan tenor, maybe it's 5 years tenor or 7 years, you spread it over that period. So it will come to about 10 point something, maybe 10.2 or 10.25 or thereabout. That is if it's 10% interest rate. But if it's, for example, 4%, it comes to about 4.25. If it's 6%, it comes to about 6.25. So that's the way it works. And I've always taken that patient to explain, this aspect that it's not hidden. And it's something that can easily be justified. And it happens in almost every institution worldwide.
We do know that the aim or the bigger objective of the Bank of Industry, which is to industrialize Nigeria, will not change. But we know that there are different strategies to it. So for 2014, what is the bank focusing on?
No, the truth is that from the perspective of the bank, what we expect in this 2014 is to promote projects that will bring better synergy between the small and medium projects and the large projects. Essentially, we want to promote large projects that will source most of their inputs from the local SMEs, so that they will provide a ready market for the product of the SMEs. They will be like the ready off-takers for them. So that is what we are going to, do a lot. And